Hello, everyone. This is Catherine Nzuki. We'll be back to our regular schedule in 2 weeks. And in the meantime, I wanted to have an informal chat/coffee chat with the Africa program intern, Daryl Lloyd. Daryl, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Catherine.
So I wanted to do this with Daryl because I get a lot of requests to do coffee chats, and I found that my answers over time are often similar. So I figured I might as well democratize this information and like the tips and tricks I picked up along the way. But obviously take these with a grain of salt. This is my singular experience. I'm in my mid to late 20s. Whoa. And, my frontal lobe just finished baking. So this is what I have to offer at this age. Daryl, would you like to introduce yourself first?
Yeah, of course. My name's Daryl Lloyd, as Catherine said. I'm the intern here at the Africa program at CSIS. Yeah, I was growing up in Kenya and Rwanda, and I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. So Daryl drafted some questions. I haven't seen them. I wanted this to be as organic as possible. So over to you, Daryl.
All right. I think just to get us started, what first inspired you to focus your career on African affairs and international policy?
Part of it was the global experiences I've been fortunate to have. I was born and raised in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. From when I was 9 until I was 11, my family lived in Oman in the Middle East. And then I spent the last 5 years of high school in Eswatini, in Babane, Eswatini. And so part of it was the lived experience of seeing all the things that as humanity, as like humans, we have in common. And then the other half was that I was a big Model United Nations nerd since I was like in 8th grade. And so I guess, since I started doing MUN, I was like, I think I am really interested in international relations and international affairs and how countries communicate with one another and affect one another and are linked both in our history, but also, now in the present.
And throughout your entire time, I guess, getting more into this space, is there a pivotal moment you can point to that influenced your approach to, let's say, research, for example?
It's probably been a few key moments. I was really fortunate to go to the high schools I went to, but particularly the high school I went to in Eswatini, we had really great English teachers, but specifically when you got to the last 2 years of high school, the IB level, I did higher level English literature, and we had this really cool teacher that helped us understand the power of a well-formed sentence, if that makes sense, and how you can have all these great ideas, but how you communicate them is what really matters. And then I went to college in Maine, of all places, Bates College. And my first semester, I took a class with Professor Bill Corlett called Western Political Theory, which I thought would be like boring, but it was actually really changed my life because I remember I asked him in our first week, like, what's the standard for a good essay? And he was like, the people you're reading, I expect your work to be as good as them. And I was like, oh, is the sky the limit? Great. And so he really like pushed me to keep working on my writing. And the only way to do that is by practicing. But on research, I was a politics major, and so I think I was prepared really well to ask questions and try and not only find answers, but communicate them well. I was lucky to have really small classroom sizes. Like by the time you got to sophomore year, even junior year, senior year, I've been in classes as small as like 5 people and 1 professor. And so you just get so much attention paid to your research and writing. And so I guess that's a long way of saying I give props to my teachers.
Yeah, shout out to Mr. Corlett.
Yeah, Bill Corlett, what a guy.
Okay. And keeping all that in mind, what are some of the biggest challenges you've encountered in this role or just working in the field more broadly?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say adjusting from college level writing to the very specific kind of writing we do at CSIS, at a think tank where the audience is no longer Bill Corlett. It's policymakers, it's different stakeholders. And so that was an adjustment. I think like being an quote unquote an outsider, like I came to the US as an international student. And so my first experience of the US was Maine, which, isn't the bustling hub that DC is. And so I had culture shock when I moved to DC because it's just a different part of America. But also, I suppose like having faith in myself, that was a bit of a challenge in saying, okay, yes, I'm not American, but I just having the feeling of I have something to contribute to these conversations. It took a while to build that up, but it's like a muscle. You know what I mean? You build it up, you say, okay, I'm in this space for a reason. I have something to say and I have opinions and other people's opinions, and it's okay to communicate them, if that makes sense. So yeah, the culture shock of moving to DC and like, I mean, you know, people of color will all relate to this. Like being in spaces, you just kind of have to like have faith in yourself and the work that you did to get there.
So keeping that in mind and your unique experiences coming to DC as an international student, what advice would you give to someone with a similar background trying to break into the think tank and policy research space in DC, especially as it relates to African issues?
Yeah. So I would say, you know, first of all, just to say it is a really rough job market right now. I've had a lot of people reach out because they're applying for the summer internship here, which is good, apply. But we've already seen way more applicants than I've personally ever seen in this role. And so the first thing to understand is that it's a numbers game, right? And that the more you apply, the more opportunities you give yourself. But the second piece of advice, like be gentle on yourself. I mean, even when it's not a tough job market, people hiring tend to have a very specific idea of what the skills they're looking for. And so align yourself as much as possible. Well, let me backtrack a little. Do your best, apply, but be easy on yourself. That's number 1, 2, 3. 4, be prudent or go the extra mile. So I receive a lot of cover letters like filled with typos, filled with grammatical errors. I know people are churning out like so many job applications, but please take the time to like double, triple check your work because especially when it comes to research roles, the first exposure I have to your writing is your cover letter, right? So that's your first opportunity to make a really good impression. So don't squander it. For, let's say somebody's coming from Tanzania and they've studied international relations and now they want to break into this field. I would say you have a paragraph in your cover letter that other people don't have necessarily, which is your lived experiences. And so be sure to add that, right? If you're saying, I have an interest in African affairs, I've done this coursework, I've taken this, data course, but also I am Tanzanian and I've lived in these cities and these are some of the observations I've made. And you don't even have to like be from the continent. Maybe you studied abroad in Ghana, like talk about that. Honestly, even if you haven't stepped foot on the continent, I mean, try, but obviously it's not cheap. And so there's some people who just have a sincere interest, but haven't had the opportunity yet to go. Try look for virtual internships. Just try to look for something that helps ground you in the field that you're looking to study in. And yeah, play up to your strengths, play up to what makes you unique and make it clear what you bring to the table. The last piece of advice, which is something that Daryl did when he was applying, is especially for think tank roles, like read recent publications that have been written. And if you make it to the interview stage, try come up with specific topical questions that can make your interviewer go, oh, that's interesting. Because A, what you're showing is, 1, I have read your recent work. And 2, I've been able to engage with it critically and come with questions, right? That aren't just me regurgitating what you wrote. So that would be my advice. Oh, and put the right company name on your cover letters. I know it, like, honestly, it is so hard. Job apps are so hard, but please go the extra mile to make sure that everything that you are submitting looks good. Last thing I would say, and this is in my opinion, don't use ChatGPT for your cover letter. A, it's all going to look the same, right? And there isn't good software out there to discern what is AI and what isn't. But I would say at a time where a lot of people have access to these language models that are churning out pretty milquetoast, cover letters, having a writing style, having a flair, having personality in your writing really sticks out. And when I see cover letters like that, it makes me happy because I'm like, this is something that somebody wrote, right? This is something that has some personality to it. And so if as much as you can, please try to show how you write and what makes you unique and find your voice in your writing.
Well, this summer's opening application, you received hundreds and hundreds of submissions. And you obviously have to review all of these. You talked about how writing style plays a big part in it. You talked about how international experience works in your favor, but if you can't, there's alternatives out there. So speaking more to that, because we obviously have people who can't afford, or, as you mentioned, it's very pricey to travel. What could be a nice substitute for that if you're looking to break into this Africa policy space, but you can't afford to visit the continent? Is there any specific examples you can point to?
Yeah, I'm sure. There's probably so many. Engaging with the diaspora. If you're here in DC has one of the biggest Ethiopian diasporas in the US and in the world, period. Get involved in your local community. Attend these cultural events, try to make friends, try to learn more about the people around you. The cool thing is you can find Africans just about anywhere. I was in Maine. I'd be walking down, our campus and Somali teenagers would pass me speaking in Swahili. And I was like, right. So we're everywhere. Let's just say you're somewhere where there isn't really a large African diaspora population. Volunteer online, volunteer with organizations that are helping people resettle and so on. There are just so many ways to get involved with people from the African continent without physically being there in a way that is constructive and will help you sort of enrich what you already read on paper. Because it's one thing, again, you can read Mail and Guardian South Africa and you can read the East African and so on, and that's good and you should. But yeah, I think ultimately when we're talking about international relations, sure, we're talking about a state and state to state relations, but states are made of people, right? And so it's one thing if you want to study Ethiopia's history, but do that and try and engage with your communities. And I think it just makes you a better person, right? I think it probably ends up making you well-rounded. But yeah, just showing that interest goes beyond the classroom is really important. And there are just so many creative ways that you can do that.
And also, real quick before we move on to the next section, as far as resumes, do you have a preference as far as length, even points within each job that you've had?
Yeah.
What can you speak about that? What stands out?
I don't have a strong preference, but I would say keep it to a page. I remember when I was applying to CSIS and I was asking for tips. Her name's Laura. She used to work for Ayla here. And she said, if you're just graduating college, there is nothing that you have done that cannot fit in one page. And I was like, you know what? Real. Because try to put it in a page. The advice I give a lot of people, because you're applying to so many different places, is have a quote unquote master resume that has all of your work experience, all of your volunteer experience, all of your campus experience, and then make tailored resumes for each field, right? So if I'm applying to think tanks, try to show your coursework, try to show your experience with writing, try to show your experience juggling multiple tasks and responsibilities. Usually you can do that by saying, I do XYZ clubs and this and that and that. Versus if you were applying for a UN internship, I'm sure it would be different. If you're applying for a consulting internship, it should be different. So the best way to save yourself some time is to just create this really long document with everything that you need and then make tailored resumes that play up to your strengths. But try to keep it at a page.
Okay, moving on to interviews. Mm-hmm. So from your experience, what helps candidates perform well in interviews, whether it's for research or policy roles or just think tanks in general?
Yeah, I would say practice. If an interviewer is asking you, everyone hates this question, but what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses? This should not be the first time you've thought through this question. And this should not be the first time that you've tried saying it out loud. And the interviewer should not be the first person hearing this answer. Get your friends, okay, and practice, because that's the only way. And when you, at least for me, the more I practice, the less nervous I become. And so, there are all these like resources online. I mean, now with AI, you can just ask it to churn out questions for you. So that's one, practice. Number two, there's something called the STAR method. You don't have to do this, but for me, whether it's been, when I was applying for jobs or just trying to find ways to pitch myself, it's been great. I think it stands for situation, task, action, and result. And result.
Yeah.
And there are more guides out there, but on how you should weigh each portion of this. But the STAR method is good if you really struggle to condense information as is clear from as I'm recording this. That's something I try to do sometime.
I actually used it when I was interviewing with you guys.
It's such a great way to like streamline your thoughts to get to like what is actually important. And so when you're asked, how do you juggle multiple tasks and responsibilities? What I'm really looking for are examples of you doing that, but actionable examples. Like, I don't want you to say, oh, I'm in, 3 clubs in college. I'm the treasurer of the da-da-da-da feminist collective, and I am also a volunteer with my school's Africana club, and I do da-da-da, and these are the tasks that I do, and this is how I manage multiple...
Specificity.
Yes. So the STAR method is good. So we've covered practice, we've covered the STAR method. For think tanks specifically, please read what that program has done recently. It'll give you a really good idea of like the questions that people in that team are asking themselves and what they're looking for. It may come up, it may not come up, but it's whether you bring up a question in, the question portion of your interview, or, at least with the AFCA program, we tend to be very conversational and chill. And so if you talk to me about your college paper on security issues in Nigeria, you can then say, and I also just read your recent report on this and I found da-da-da-da is interesting. Now, does it feel weird and like suck up-ish? Yeah, it does. It feels awkward. It feels really strange. But I promise you what you're signaling is I've engaged critically with the work that you are doing. And then if the organization has a funny name, not a funny name, but if the organization has like a long name or something like that, just maybe put a sticky note so that you remember. People get nervous, and instead of saying CSIS, they'll be like CIS or C, and it's completely fine. It's not something to disqualify you, but having a little sticky note will be helpful, especially if you're doing multiple interviews. It's easy to lose track. Yeah, those would be my and then the best advice I got, because I if I get nervous and rambly, was my drama teacher in like grade 9. And she said, before you answer, take one really nice deep breath and breathe out, then answer. Because it just kind of gives you a second to like center yourself and make sure you're putting your best foot forward. So, and the breath might feel long to you. For everybody else, it's like nothing. So take a nice breath and answer.
So moving on to networking. As a junior staff member or even an intern, it can often feel like a daunting task to approach someone who's like in a much more senior position and ask for, a piece of their time. And so how would you recommend reaching out to professionals whose work interests me? And, should I ask for informational interviews, or is there a better approach? Like, what is the etiquette?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm a big believer in shooting your shot. So like 100%, if you want to talk to somebody, you should reach out. When I was starting this podcast, I reached out to Sean Ramaswamy, who's the host of Today Explained, which is my favorite podcast. And what I did, which is a formula that has worked for me, is obviously a very polite greeting. If you don't know them, stay on the side, be cautious. So call them, start with dear, da-da-da-da-da. Don't be casual. One sentence introducing yourself, and then 2 or 3 sentences that actually show you've done more than, I don't know, skim their LinkedIn. So with Sean Rameswaram, I mean, I listen to Today Explained every day, but he had a running bit about Brat Summer, like Charlie XCX Brat Summer. And so I was like, I hope you're enjoying your Brat Summer. I also enjoyed this podcast and that podcast, just to show like, no, I'm not just reaching out on a whim. Like I've taken some time to get to know you. And then, shoot your shot. Ask for a coffee chat. Usually just say can I please have 30 minutes of your time? But don't take it personally if they say no, or if they're busy, or if they don't reply, because 99% of the time, like somebody's just swamped and busy. And if you're listening to this and I haven't replied to your email, double down. So reply. If you don't hear anything, circle back in 2 weeks. And if you don't hear anything after that, you got to let it go and hope that you'll run into them organically. But the other half of that equation, and I think this is where people really stumble, is when you get to the networking call, again, please come prepared, almost like an interview, right? Read their work, have specific questions, and be intentional in that you have prepared yourself well, but also be present, because a lot of times I can see somebody asking a question and then immediately thinking of their next question. Like, be there, be present, be chill, like engage with this person as like a human being that you are in conversation with. Like, throwing out 5 generic questions isn't actually building a network, if that makes sense. Asking follow-ups, asking tailored questions makes you more memorable and actually helps to build kindle some sort of like friendship or connection that could then lead to that person being quote unquote in your network, right? But if you just ask me like 5 generic questions, no follow-up, no sort of nuance to it, it's not using this opportunity to the best of your abilities.
Okay, so you talked about the do's. Now I want to hear a bit more about the don'ts. What are some of the common mistakes you see interns or junior staff making when they're networking in this space, and how would you advise our listeners to avoid them?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I'd say is always stay on the side of formality until you are told otherwise. So always start with dear, look up that person's title. I've gotten a few, not too many, a few like doctor, and I'm like, I wish, right? But that's not happening. Soon. Right. So like just look up that person and make sure you're getting the right title. And God forbid it's the inverse where they actually are, they have that doctor in their title and you don't use it.
So moving on, I guess, to now the social media side of things. Have you found LinkedIn or other platforms helpful for networking in this field? And do you have tips on how to use them effectively?
Yeah. I honestly used to be like, oh, LinkedIn, everybody's like, I'm so grateful to announce, But then I started this podcast and I started making LinkedIn posts. And then that's how people have been finding the podcast. So I do have to swallow a lot of the things I've said about LinkedIn. That's how I find it. Right. And it's like, so it's been helpful in helping me find the people that would be interested in these conversations. And so, yeah, LinkedIn's good. I would say on any social media, but especially LinkedIn, post what you're comfortable having reshared. I've seen posts with people frustrated, rightly, but, railing against like an interview they had. And, even though they're trying to be cryptic, but like, I think if you've got stuff to say, you got to take it to your like burner Twitter account or something, dude, or you got to take it to your close friends on IG. Don't bring that on LinkedIn. Think of it as a professional, platform. And so, yeah. And the question of hot takes, I remember when I first started, there's a director here who was like, listen, y'all are young, okay? Sometimes we don't have the luxury of having super hot takes because, well, you're young and that's what you'll be judged on, right? Versus somebody who's like much further established. They can say what they want to say and they probably won't. I mean, obviously with some limitations, but they can, I'm being very vague for a good reason, but if you got a hot take, don't post it on LinkedIn. And don't do it.
So we've talked about the cover letters, we've talked about the resumes, we've discussed the interview process, but now moving more into the weeds and the work that you actually do. Are there any specific habits or routines you recommend for building strong research and analytical skills?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of this is stuff I've picked up from the directors I've worked with and the fellows and senior fellows I've, reading the news. I know it sounds so like basic, but reading the news is really important. I know people here who wake up at 5 a.m. and spend the first hour of their day just reading up on things that have happened in their countries, in their regions. So that has really helped me as like a habit. I have a lot of news apps on my phone and I get a lot of alerts, and those have been really helpful in just keeping me aware of what's happening. I say this a lot, but like I'm like a podcast fiend. Like I'm constantly listening to podcasts. And so the other way that I stay really up to date is just following a variety of news shows. I really like Focus on Africa by the BBC, also BBC Africa. DW has a really good podcast. And then for like niche or more specific podcasts, I really love the SMWX podcast. It's started by Sizwe Mpofo Walsh. He's like a South African commentator and expert. So those have been good. In terms of research, I think the number one thing I've had to learn is that you're not doing this alone and that you can just send out emails to professionals who are experts in this field. I remember one of the coolest things I've actually ever been able to work on was the weeks leading up to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And the program I worked for at the time and the humanitarian agenda here, we got together to write about the possible civilian impacts of a full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine. And I was like, how am I gonna talk about this? But then we just sent out emails to like people working for the UN Refugee Agency based in that area. We talked to people who work on humanitarian responses, et cetera. And through that, we were able to form an understanding of what the immediate and long-term impacts would be of this full-scale invasion. And so the research doesn't start and stop with texts and books. So you can learn from people really actively in the field. Because, think tanks, we try our best to engage and go out, but there's some people who, if you're the UN Refugee Agency coordinator for Ukraine, you're just so much closer to this issue than we could ever be, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Final question would be, as interns, we're looking for ways to stand out, and kind of transition more to like a full-time position. So what qualities or skills do you look for in junior team members or interns who stand out?
You probably heard me say this a lot, but attention to detail is really important. Like making sure that your work is good, understandable, clean. And it's such an adjustment from like college to a think tank internship because it's just a different way of communicating ideas. It's a different way of talking. But if you, and Daryl can speak to this, like if you just keep going at it, you will finally find not only what's good, but what it means to have attention to detail. And I think having attention to detail reliably, consistently, means that people will give you more and more tasks. It's almost like, what's that thing people say? The benefit of good work is more work.
Yes,
you know what I mean?
Yep.
So like if you just are consistent and have attention to detail, those are two of the really big things that we pay attention to. Of course, the other one is ideally internship roles transfer to full time, but especially in this job market, it's really hard. And so again, you got to go easy on yourself. What about you, Daryl? What would you say you've learned since being with us from January?
I would definitely say the ability to multitask. I know coming in, I thought that in my previous experiences that, I was very adept at multitasking, but I feel like here in particular, because it is a smaller program, that you are assigned more work, but because of that, you do get to broaden your skills and learn a lot more new things. And so multitasking is definitely a very important skill to have as an intern.
Have you found yourself reading more news?
I have,
right?
Yes, daily, actually.
It's like, it is just you, because you're, like, for example, we work with Cameron Hudson, and very cool, and is very knowledgeable on Sudan. And so sometimes he'll be speaking and it's like, I should know this. And then all of a sudden you're like, as soon as you see an article on Sudan, you're like, I mean, not only for Cameron, but also for, our own edification, if you will. But you just find yourself, or Vemba Dizolele, he's a DRC expert. He starts speaking, and eventually you're like, I would love to know more about this piece of like DRC's history. And so you just find yourself reading a lot of news all the time. And then not just reading it, but also digesting it and then starting to see patterns forming. Yeah. What do you think you would tell yourself, the version of you, that started in like mid-January?
I would say, specifically for people who are focused in covering Africa, it's obviously a very vast continent. And so people do specialize in like very certain regions. But I think reading about events that are outside of your area of expertise, I feel like can allow you to understand or give you a better like thematic overview of what's taking place on the continent. Because I think it is very easy to get caught up in a bubble when you're covering an entire continent. And so reading things that are outside of your area of expertise will help to broaden and give you like a bigger perspective on what's really going on.
I agree.
Yeah.
And even just, ultimately, part of what we do at think tanks is finding trends that are forming, right? And really the only way to do that is by staying up to date on what feels like everything. And then Daryl, maybe my last question for you is, have you learned anything about networking? You just staffed a podcast interview with His Excellency Peter Obi right now, which is very cool. Have you learned anything about networking or talking to experts through your time here at CSIS and like the exposure to all the really incredible people that come through our doors here?
I think, yes, I definitely have. And I think one thing that you mentioned earlier that I feel like is certainly key when you're speaking to people who have the jobs that you hope to one day have as well is really reading and engaging with their work. Because these people spend countless hours, alone writing and trying to churn out material for the world to read. And if you take the time to really engage with their work, they will truly appreciate it. And that can be a way to strike up a conversation as well. So really taking time to read their work.
Yeah. Oh, and actually that reminds me, if there's another really big piece of advice I have for networking is please network across. Because these are your peers and you should try and make friends, right? Like if you're all doing, I don't know, UN internships, you're there because surely you have some sort of interest in what you're doing. But also secondly, like the person who's the intern next to you, 10 years down the line, that person might be your boss, right? Like, so do it for yourself and for the joys of friendship and the joys of fraternity and community. But if you're going to do it for selfish reasons, it's because these people will be your boss at some point, or you'll be working together in some high level, da-da-da-da-da-da. And so as you're both progressing in your careers, you'll inevitably keep interacting and keep intersecting. So yeah, talk to your mate, chat with your mates. I can't even begin to describe how phenomenal the friendships are formed here at CSIS are, and all the people who've come and gone, but have left me with so much advice and knowledge and tips and just helped me thrive. That's part of that is just taking the time to build friendships with people. Sisa? Tumamaliza.
Yeah.
Guys, thank you to Daryl, our outstanding intern. Thank you all for listening, and we will be back in 2 weeks on our regular schedule. All right. Bye.
Bye.